going to be talking about the 5 differences I have found between selling at craft fairs and conventions. So hello guys, yes, today I'm going to be sharing my experiences between the difference of selling between craft fairs and conventions. Now I have sold at multiple craft fairs and I've sold at multiple conventions. I like to feel that I know the difference between the two, and they do differ, and maybe you're thinking of doing a convention or craft fair to maybe get your name out there, and hopefully this will be a little bit helpful for you guys. So I've listed the first 5 things that I have personally found. Now it's going to be different if you're in America, if you're in Canada, if you're anywhere across the world. This might be different for you, but this is what I found for me in the UK. And yeah, hopefully you'll get to know which one you want to pick, or maybe you want to try out both by the end of this video. So let's jump straight into it. So the first thing is footfall. The difference between craft fairs and conventions in terms of footfall is craft fairs typically are a lot quieter than conventions. So footfall basically just means crowd levels, and if you're approaching a craft fair, or maybe a craft fair has approached you or a convention has approached you, I used to ask what their estimated footfall was for that event, which means the estimated crowd levels. Obviously the bigger the footfall, the better the sales are going to be, the more crowded it's going to be, and yeah, the more busy it's going to be, which could be a plus or a negative depending on how you think about it. So maybe it's your first ever time selling in person, selling your product, and you're just kind of experimenting and you don't really know exactly how to sell, how to set up your table or anything. I would definitely maybe go for a craft fair which has less footfall than a convention. Typically I found conventions have a lot higher footfall. Basically they're quite big events, or at least the events that I went to, conventions tend to have quite a heavy footfall in comparison to craft fairs. Now craft fairs for me used to be quite quiet. I have been to some busier craft fairs, but the majority of craft fairs that I've been to have been kind of steady away and haven't really been a fraction of the footfall that conventions would be, which also means you need to take more product. Obviously if you're going to a convention that's small to medium size, it could have a considerable footfall difference to a craft fair. So if you're starting out, it might be a good idea to try out a craft fair in your local area and kind of experiment that way. If you go to a smaller one, you'll feel more confident. You might not gain a lot of profit, you might only make your table money back, but then that'll give you the confidence to do another craft fair that's perhaps a little bigger, or a convention which is quite high up there. Now I didn't do a convention until I'd done at least 5 craft fairs, and I was comfortable with kind of standing behind my booth. I kind of had a lot more product to sell at conventions, and yeah, I had the product inventory behind, which can also be the downside to selling at conventions, is particularly if you're starting up, you do need a lot more inventory, which means you could potentially come away from that convention if it's quiet with a lot of back stock. So if you've got an Etsy store, it's not really an issue because you can then list it on your Etsy. I know some people who purely sell individual items just at conventions they attend, and then whatever they don't sell, they list it on the Etsy store, so it's not a big deal. But craft fairs typically, I used to take a lot less inventory to craft fairs, and yeah, they weren't as busy and the footfall wasn't as heavy as the conventions that I've been to. So that brings me into my second point, which is the difference between the audience. So craft fairs typically for me had a much older audience. Depending if you're at a trendy craft fair, like we have Festival of Thrift here, which actually has a really heavy footfall, but people go to that more to drink and eat food than they do to purchase handmade goods. What I find at conventions is people are going to conventions to buy merchandise from their favourite fandom, or maybe they want to find new artists. If you're an illustrator or artist, a convention is fantastic. It tends to vary in audience, but it tends to be kind of more my personal audience because my influence of my illustrations, it has a lot of Japanese kawaii influence in my work and my illustrations, and I do find like most conventions have an artist alley or a comic village, and they are specifically artists who sell, and people actually go to conventions to discover new artists. I know I do. I absolutely love walking around Artist Alley. That is probably where I spend the bulk of my time, and I look at other people's prints and stuff. So in that respect, conventions are fantastic for artists who sell things like prints, enamel pins, tote bags and things like that, because that merchandise is what is expected to sell at conventions. That is what I typically save my money at conventions and go and buy. I like to buy new art prints, I like to support other artists there, and that's typically just the type of merchandise you'll find, along with plushie toys and kind of the typical convention stalls. And craft fairs has a completely different audience depending on which craft fair you go to. Now there is a really edgy, there is a really like cool type of craft fairs where it's like craft beers, and then it's kind of like jewellery, and it's targeted towards people in the 20s and 30s, and it's kind of like cool and edgy and it's contemporary. But around my area, typically the craft fairs were older, so it would range from things like crochet, again jewellery and greeting cards and things like that. So if you find yourself you're more in that category, the craft fairs may be a good option for you. But conventions also do jewellery and things like that, but craft fairs just has a slightly different audience. Like the audience there, I would say in my local area, were a lot older. I got a lot of elderly women who used to come to my store, and particularly I don't think my style appeals to the majority of elderly women. My target market is primarily between 18 to 35 and plus, but it's quite niche. You need to kind of enjoy that pastel kawaii kind of style, and I just felt like I fit in a lot better at conventions, and the audience got me straight away. Whereas I did actually sell to elderly people at craft fairs, and audience that I wouldn't normally sell to at craft fairs, but it took them quite a while because they were kind of like, this is different. They've probably never been on the convention scene before, and they're looking at my work and they're like, oh, this is very different compared to everyone else at this craft fair, because normally it's kind of like a lot of watercolours at craft fairs. This is very this is generalizing, guys, but there's a lot of watercolors, there's a lot of greetings cards that would appeal to that kind of audience, and yeah, more kind of generic selling things, whereas I feel like my stuff was a bit more niche, and a lot of people at craft fairs would look and they'd be like, oh, this is interesting. So definitely bear in mind what your business actually does. Maybe you do stunning watercolor greeting cards and it's countryside themed, for example, and there's going to be a countryside farmers fair, then that would be ideal because your target audience would be at that farmers craft fair. But for me personally, with this kawaii, cute, anime inspired style that I've kind of developed myself, but has that influence and background to it, I definitely found conventions were a lot better for me, typically ones that had a heavy anime kawaii audience. Next point, which is the emotional side of selling at craft fair and conventions. Now, to me, they're both very, very, very emotionally and physically and mentally draining. You kind of feel like you're on all day. So from setup, you set up, that's physically tiring. I had a big massive grid box system, which you can look back at my old convention videos, which are super old now, so please, I cringe so bad at some of them. But you can see me kind of set up my convention. So it was a big massive metal system. I used to try and get people to help me, but I have done craft fairs and conventions by myself, and I used to have similar setups for both conventions and craft fairs, and I used to, obviously the physical side is tiring, but then you're also on in sales mode, in happy mode, in always on and engaging mode throughout the whole day, and it can be a very, very, very long day. Sometimes it's hard to even get a break and eat a sandwich, particularly at busier conventions I've done like SunnyCon, which also leads me back into the first point, which is the footfall difference and how mentally draining it is depending on the footfall. So if you're at a craft fair and it's typically a lower crowd, you have a lot more time to relax in between people kind of coming and going. You will always have kind of lulls and then like peak times where there's loads of people around your table, and then kind of quieter times. And I feel like craft fairs are a lot more steady paced, a lot more relaxed, and a lot more kind of, yeah, chill. Whereas conventions, for me personally, especially SunnyCon, was always go, 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 go. There was always someone at my table, and sometimes tons of people at my table. If there was like a crowd of people, maybe an event, maybe the cosplay masquerade had just finished and everyone was kind of filtering out to spend the last bit of money down Artist Alley, and it is just constantly go, go, go. You're always in the on mode, you're always smiling and positive, and obviously you try and be smiling and positive all the time, but I find that interaction very emotionally draining, and by the time I'm finished I am exhausted. It completely takes it out of me, honestly, especially at like a 3-day convention. I am out for the count for the next week. It totally knocks it out of me. So if you are just starting up, like I said earlier in this video, maybe a craft fair, something really small, getting you used to that kind of salesy interaction, which kind of makes me feel weird, although you shouldn't feel weird about it. You should be proud of your own products. But me personally, I found it really, really hard to be like, buy this. Hey, there's some like amazing salespeople at conventions who are like, oh, maybe you want to look at this. This offer is on 2 for $5. Or maybe you want to see these enamel pins. I've got these enamel pins on for 2 for £12 or whatever. I found it really hard to do that, and sometimes I would force myself to do that, but I found it really hard to kind of sell myself in that respect. I tried to let my work sell itself, and then they ask me how much everything was, which isn't the greatest sales tactic. Sometimes I was on the ball. If I had a lot of coffee, I'd be like, oh, well, if you get 1 greetings card, it's like 3 for $5 if you want to pick that up, and I'd be like that. But it definitely gets very, very draining. I also found craft fairs mentally draining, but they were just a lot more chilled because the footfall was a lot lower than conventions. There's also a lot of mental stimulation at conventions. I love cosplay and things like that, and I love seeing other people's cosplay. I don't personally cosplay, but I would love to eventually. But I always was at conventions behind my stall. I was always mentally stimulated, like all day, looking at people's cosplay, seeing different people come over. That constant mental stimulation was really overwhelming and can be overwhelming, but it also makes you feel really good. Sometimes you really get hyped by the atmosphere and the crowd at a convention, and you feel really buzzed and energetic there, and then you come away feeling very, very tired. Next up is the difference in events. So depending on what craft fair you go to, there might be certain events during the day, like maybe there's a talk, or maybe there is a show on, maybe you're at a gala craft fair and there's going to be like, I don't know, a parade going on. But most often than not, most craft fairs are just kind of a craft fair, and it's just a shopping experience. So people come and go throughout the day, and it's kind of steady away throughout the day. Obviously during dinner time, some people might go away, and during the morning times it might be a little quieter, but generally craft fairs are kind of the same throughout the day. You will get the peaks and lulls, but it's not the same as conventions. With conventions, there are typically events going on during that day, so there'll be different hours and different slots, and what I used to find is there would be a mad rush of people during certain quiet times where there wasn't particularly any good event on stage. So maybe the cosplay masquerade was on, that would be a quieter time for conventions because the majority of people would go and see the cosplay masquerade, and whereas a craft fair tends to typically be like your normal working day in the morning. It might be a little bit quiet. During lunchtime, people might go away and have lunch, but then after lunch it might be very, very busy, but it's still kind of, you know, nice and smooth. I kind of feel like the line is like this, like nice steady waves with craft fairs. With convention, I think it's like kind of like massive tidal waves. Like it kind of comes like a massive crowd of people, like I'm gonna get drowned by all these people, and then it'll go quiet and you'll be like, oh, it's quiet again, and then you'll be hit by a second tidal wave. That's what I found the difference between craft fairs and conventions. And I want to talk about the money side of craft fairs versus conventions. Now, in terms of money, I very rarely made over £100 for a craft fair for one day. Now some people might think that is really, really good, but you have to remember you've made the inventory, you've also set up, the amount of times you've sat there and kind of chatted to people. Very, very rarely would I make over £100. I think the most actually I made was around £80 at a craft fair. At a convention, it was different. At SunnyCon, the last time I went to SunnyCon, it was a 3-day convention, bearing in mind, I made over £600. So that is obviously considerably different to the craft fair in terms of price, but I also had to have more inventory, so obviously my expenses were a lot higher anyway, and yeah, I had a lot more backstock, but I already sold enamel pins and things in my Etsy store, so I already had them. It wasn't an issue if I didn't sell them. I already sold prints in my Etsy store, so it wasn't an issue if I didn't sell them. So yeah, that was the price difference. Now I never went to a huge trendy craft fair because there wasn't really that many in this area. I know there is different craft fairs now. Etsy hold craft fairs. In America there's a craft fair called Renegade. There are craft fairs in London which could be fantastic for a trendier, younger market. Just look at your illustrations and your style and see what tag audience you have. Like I said, you might be really suited to craft fairs. If you do kind of like watercolor illustrations, or if you sell food, obviously food markets and craft fairs are going to be fantastic for you. But if you kind of more niche and edgy, or kind of have fandom based illustrations, then conventions are probably better for you. And I personally found, for me, conventions were much better place to sell. If you're starting out, like I say, try out a smaller convention or craft fair just to get your foot in and the feel of it and get used to it and kind of get used to your table setup. Let me know your experiences too. I would love to hear what you think of selling at a craft fair. Maybe you have huge success at craft fairs and you want to share that with other people. Definitely share it in the comments below, because that's really, really helpful, because the more different artists and sellers and illustrators and crafters and makers share their experience, the better it is, because obviously this is just my opinion and what I sell might not be the same as what you sell, so definitely leave that below. And if you are on the convention scene, please leave your experiences for people in the comments below as well. And yeah, I hope you found this video helpful and you enjoyed it. Maybe it helps you decide what to do next. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my beautiful Patreons who help support this channel and help me dedicate the time to film these sorts of videos with you. So thank you so much for being here, everyone. I love you so freaking much. Alright then, I'll see you very soon. Love you. Goodbye.